Welcome to the Wordy Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Hello, everybody. It is the Wordy Pair Podcast you are listening to today, and as always, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we're going to be starting out talking about tracking your word count and other things that might distract you from actually getting writing done. This is going to be a little bit of an unfocused episode, but we're going to start there and see where it takes us. So here we go.
Us unfocused?
Perish the thought.
All right, do you want to take it away, or shall I?
Sure. Well, I mean, okay, so here's the thing. If you are writing professionally, or at least attempting to write professionally, keeping track of your word counts is actually very important, because it is a very good measure. It is not the only measure, but it is a very good base measure of your productivity as a writer. Because if you go 2 weeks without writing a single word, and then something is wrong. And if you write 8,000 words one day and then no words for the next month, that's still not good. If you're writing vastly different numbers of words while trying to do writing and not things like editing or revisions, then you might have pacing issues just in the amount of effort that you're putting into things, and you might improve your results by trying to even that pace out a little bit. But on the other hand, spending too much time worrying about it, or worrying about it when it's not a good measure of your quote-unquote productivity, could be counterproductive and could stop you from actually getting writing done in the first place. So that's kind of my 5-second top-level take on that. What have you got to add or subtract from that?
Well, it was your idea to bring this subject up, and I thought it was a good one just because I spend the occasional moments on Twitter, and that is something that I see a lot of people doing, is talking about, what's your word count? What did I do today? How much did I write today? And it's just like, I have seen both ends of the extreme where people are like, how do you write a book in a month? And people are like, well, you just divide it down to the words and here you go. It's actually not that hard. And other people are like, how do you like, okay, so there's a lot of people that think that the word count is important in the end, especially, where it's like, well, should it be this length, or this length? And it's like, sometimes everyone is right.
Yeah.
Sometimes a book can be, if a book has to be incredibly long for it to work, then it has to be incredibly long. If a book has to be, if you're trying to get regularly published by people, you're going to get a lot of rejections if you keep giving people, like a 500,000 word story when they're trying to publish 60,000 word stories. So
Right.
It also depends on where you take it to get published, which is the research portion of trying to get published. It's vastly different in the world of independent publishing, but there's some things to watch out for there as well. I have seen a lot of people on Amazon or various independent platforms that you can publish on.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, I wrote a book, and it's like, oh, I'll check this person's book out. 20 pages. I can't do anything with this. This isn't even bathroom reading.
Yeah.
But it's like, I wrote a novel. No, you didn't. You wrote a pamphlet. And maybe that pamphlet has its place. And actually, that is, if if that is the way that you like to write, there's no problem with that. If you write pamphlet-sized stories where it's like, 5 to 10 pages, even, 5 to 30 pages, all you have to do is write several of them, compile them into a collection, and there's your book.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't recommend putting out 20 pages and expecting people to spend $4.99 on it. It does work sometimes. There are things out there that people will spend that money on for, a handful of pages, but it might be worth it to think about, I need to work on the length. But the word count itself is irrelevant in all of those scenarios because you're not really gauging anything or learning anything about how you're going to have a finished product by keeping track of your word count. You either have a product that X publisher or X independent platform is going to be able to sell, or you don't. So getting hung up on making sure you hit around 60,000 words to be quote-unquote official novel length does you no good. There are great... we were just talking about it. Was it the last one we did where
Sure.
we brought up The Great Gatsby, and it was
Right.
neither of us knew that it was actually, a 42,000 word book or something?
Yeah, it's 43,000 words, something like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the, and here again, quote-unquote,
That's an
great
American classic.
novels.
Yeah.
So it's not too important to get hung up on it, especially if you have a completed work. If you have something that you're like, this is done, and it's sitting at 35,000 words, and you're like, I got to get it up to 45 to 60, or it's not really a novel, you're going to ruin it. Probably.
Well,
I mean, maybe not necessarily, but you might.
You
might have something that...
What'll happen is the most likely problem that you're going to run up with is that in doing so, you're going to mess up the pace.
Yeah.
Because what you'll be tempted to do is you'll be tempted to add more to places where it doesn't belong, and it might be that the flow of your book worked better without that extra description in the action scene, for instance. Something like that. That's the thing I kind of worry about a little bit here and there. I mean, to be fair, it's perfectly reasonable to gain significant chunks of story when you revise, because the redraft might show you that there's a serious issue with the book. Now, this is a thing that a lot of people might not do enough, right? There are plenty of people who don't redraft enough before they throw something up there, and if you've only redrafted once or twice, then maybe more stuff does need to be added. But once you get to a point where you feel that like the book is complete, reading it, then adding more just to add more might ruin something else, and you need to be careful about that.
Yeah, and your spatial recognition might have some problems too. So I just looked it up. The book I'm working on now is 94,000 words roughly, and I thought I was done around 65. And it's just like, no, this story isn't done. But I didn't realize I was getting up to 100,000 just yet, because in my head I'm thinking about everything that happened, and I'm like, there's really not too much here. It can't quite be there. And sure enough, there I am. Now, I can already tell a lot's going to be cut out just from what I've done so far, but I'm not worried about maintaining a certain level of count in this book. It's fun to look at. It's fun to say, oh, I actually sat down and wrote all this, but it doesn't benefit you in any way. Like the running joke that you and I had. Well, not running joke, but we bring this up sometimes when we're talking about one of the books I wrote, where I made the last chapter incredibly long, and you always say, yeah, you probably should have like broken that up into 3 chapters or something. Yeah. But it was just funny that it worked out that way. And I was like, just on a whim, I was like, no, I'm just going to leave it like this. I'll just leave this ridiculously long chapter at the end of a book. The word count itself in each chapter doesn't matter. There are people again, this is a thing I see a lot of the people on the writing world of Twitter. They talk about how long a chapter should be. And the answer is, how long do you think your chapters need to be? I mean, if you want to be a person who writes chapters that are roughly the same size, go for it. If you want to be an incredibly weird and eccentric, and those words mean the same thing according to our intro person, then do something stupid like I did, where you just say, oh, okay, I'm going to have this last chapter be like a third of the book in a book with more than 3 chapters.
Many
So,
more. Several
so yeah,
more.
just figure out what works for you, and don't sit there. You don't want to become someone who sits there researching on the internet what is the appropriate size for a size and length for chapters and lengths of books, and just be like so caught up on getting that right that you don't actually put out the story you want to put out.
Right.
I mean, there's some things that have their own upper limits. You can drag out explanations for, say, if you're writing a nonfiction.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You want to avoid. You don't want to drag out explanations. You want them to be as descriptive as you need them to be, but you don't want to drag them out, because drag them out means that you're making them unnecessarily long. And this is one of those things where if you have, let's say you have a relatively short 1,000 word description of a new setting in the book, and your goal is to expand that to 3,000. Well, what you're actually doing is you're separating the scene that happens before the description from the scene that happens after the description. And so if your pacing is proper when you have 1,000 words between those two scenes, and you triple that length simply to make the description more, even doing a good job making that description more detailed, then you might ruin the pacing of the story where the action is happening in the previous and following scenes. So,
but it's an artist's quandary. You're painting a picture, and one artist thinks you should fill every space on the picture, and another one is like, no, you should go for a minimalist look. And they're simultaneously correct and they're simultaneously wrong. It largely depends on the person who's making the picture and what it is they want it to look like in the end. Because as with art, when you write something, you're never going to get it exactly like it is in your head. You don't really... There are technical rules you can and sometimes should follow, and at other times you kind of have to look at it and it's like, well, is this going to make the thing closer to what I want in my head or further away from it? That's one of the most important, like if you're working around that central axis right there, that's kind of your best measure of what it is you should actually be doing. What's getting it closer to what you've got in your head? And sometimes that'll get messed up. Like sometimes if, let's say you're drawing a picture and you're a little bit away from what you're thinking you wanted to draw, and so you're like, no, I'm going to change this and try to get it just a little bit closer. And then when you finish that next part, it's like, oh no, I took it way further away. There's no real precise mechanism for nailing that exact image that you have in your head. And then of course, if you mess around as a writer with that kind of thing, you may end up with 14 different descriptions of something, and now it's like, all right, well, now I've actually chosen one that's completely different from the one that I've started with, and it actually worked better. So sometimes it's you'll see that maybe the thing you had in your head at the moment wasn't the best thing anyway, and it doesn't really help to add that extra layer of, I have this volume of cube that I need to fill with word count. It needs to be up to the brim. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, and again, spending too much time muddling over it is also not in your best interests, because periodic, say daily measurements of a word count are helpful for measuring your output, but at the same time, it's the same problem we saw. It was in the Larry Correa thing, right, where like someone was checking their Amazon standing like every 15 minutes when it only updates once an hour.
Yeah.
So it can be like that, where you're where you're worrying too much and spending more time checking how many words you've written, and what that does is it breaks up your concentration as well, preventing you from writing more coherent, longer passages, perhaps.
I mean,
once or twice a day is probably plenty, unless you're putting yourself under some kind of like self-imposed challenge to say, write a flash fiction story of 2,000 words in 2 hours or something like that. If you were going to try to do that, then you would need to measure it on 2 hours. But generally speaking, you don't want to be constantly stopwatching yourself and making up all kinds of crazy demands for yourself. You want to actually spend time concentrating and getting words down on the page instead.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it any way you want, but in
Sure,
reality,
but my point is that your productivity will suffer and your coherence might suffer as well.
yeah, the best habit is if you're going to have a strict thing that you follow, the best one to have is I'm going to write for this much time a day, or I'm going to write this many words a day. Now, in that sense, word count is fine, because anyone who says, all right, my goal is to write 400 words a day, really you're going to come maybe a little bit under or a little bit over, depending on where it is that is good to stop for what you did that day. So
Yeah.
saying about 400 words a day is a good measure of something that you could do every day and get something done in a productive and timely fashion. But saying that story has to be X length long doesn't give you any indication of how long it's going to take. It doesn't tell you how much you should be. I mean, you can divide that down into what you should do every day, but how do you know you're not going to hit that point and be like, oh, it actually needs to be longer, and because I picked this arbitrary number and divided my time out by that, I actually ran out of time. If you have like a schedule or something you're trying to
Yeah, if you have a deadline, say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the thing to do with deadlines is always to leave yourself a little bit of breathing room with those.
Yeah.
Especially the longer the object that you're working on is, the more careful you want to be to leave yourself a little extra time in the deadline, because even if you are being as productive as you think you need to be, you might also come up with a situation where, oh, I can't write anything today because something unexpected happened and I literally can't sit down. I have to do stuff. If you're writing a short story on a deadline, then maybe instead of 2 days, you take 3 days, right? If you're writing a novel, say 100,000 word novel on a deadline, well, then maybe instead of 90 days, you take 95. Or if you have a deadline that's 90 days away, you budget to finish the story in 80. And then once you reach that, the 40th day, you say, okay, how am I doing? Do I need to adjust my schedule or not? You should, if you're writing on a deadline, you do need to pay attention to these things, but the goal should be to pay attention to it relatively little. So the easiest thing to do would be to say, okay, I'm expecting this to be around, I'm going to spend the first week doing an outline, say. Then after that, I should have a fairly decent, rough idea of how long this thing will be. And once I have that, I can separate out, 90% of my remaining time into that number of words and see where I'm at halfway through. And that way you're not doing it every hour, but you're also not doing it every month. You could really get yourself into a bad situation that way.
Yeah, it's the let's see, is there a nice way to say this? No, there's really not. I mean, this is like the high school English teacher dilemma, wherein talk about a useless group of people. You get these tests that are like, describe this in 500 words or less. Okay, I sit down and I write 100 words out and I hand it in. It's like, well, it was 500 words or less. What is this? It's just a couple sentences. It's a really good description. Yeah, but you should have been closer to the 500.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have a really good description and you followed the rules, if you make the rule arbitrarily, no, it needs to be this number, then no matter how good of a job you did with those 100 words, suddenly that doesn't matter anymore. That's kind of how I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, it's a fault of the instructions, because the instructions said 500 words or less. And if the teacher says,
I assure you that if you have a 500 word or less essay that a teacher wants you to write, or a description of something, and you write something really good in 100 words, the teacher is still going to give you a bad grade.
That's my point.
Been there, done
That's the
that.
point I'm making. my point is that their instructions are wrong. The instructions should say in 400 to 500 words. That would solve that problem.
Yeah, but they're just English teachers. What do they know about using words properly?
And they could also say about 500 words, which would solve that problem as well.
Again. I needed to rag on English teachers for a minute. That's all.
That's all right.
At least high school ones. I mean, by high school, what are they teaching? What are they really teaching by high school?
Well, by high school, you aren't learning English anymore, I hope.
Yeah. It's not like
in the high school years, I had the reading 10 class, I had American literature, and I had English literature. So it was mostly reading at that point, and then writing about what I read, reports, so to speak.
It was like a book report club or something. I don't know.
Yeah, basically.
Still, there's a lot of hang-ups that people have about their writing and word counts and so forth that, I mean, it's not too difficult to, especially if you're perusing places like Twitter or Facebook where people are talking about, people love to talk about when they're writing. I noticed that, like, when I started trying to follow people that were writing books,
Yeah.
I'd see a lot of messages where it's like, wow, I just blew through 3,000 words today. I'm feeling good. I'm going to go have a cup of coffee. And it's like, I wonder what this person's inner monologue is like.
Have you ever heard the commercial for Meow Mix?
Well, I mean, when I see things like that,
I'm kidding. I'm mostly kidding.
No, you're not.
Maybe.
When you see things like that, it's just, it's like that. I'm trying to remember where that joke was from about how, a guy will sit in a Starbucks with a laptop and it's more important to be seen writing than to actually write the book. Was that a Family Guy joke? It was something like that.
Something like that.
And it's like, no, it's not important at all because nobody cares. Nobody cares that you wrote 3,000 words today. Nobody cares that...
Well, your publisher might care, but that's a different story.
Yes, but most of the people that are doing that don't have a contract yet. Yeah. Or they're planning on publishing independently, and it's like, all right.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where...
People just got to get it out of their system,
They get it out of their system, or, they're like, oh, well, it makes me feel better about what I did.
Yeah.
To tell people that I did good today.
A sense
because nobody else is going to tell me that I did good today. I'm a writer.
Right. I want a t-shirt that says that. Nobody else is going to tell me I did good today. I'm a writer.
We're going to make that t-shirt. I'm going to make that t-shirt with the Wordy Pair logo on the front.
All right. Should I open up a Teespring store? Should we sell it?
I'm going to do it.
All right. Yeah. So should I jump on Twitter and tell everyone that we just came up with a great idea and we're going to
do it after the episode's done?
I'm making a joke about people.
I know that you are.
Yeah. I'm not going on Twitter and telling people anything. Yeah. So what other hang-ups do people have? I think book covers are a big one, and that one is a little... I can be a little less...
Book covers are pretty important, unfortunately.
They are. They definitely are. And, I'm living proof of this, if anyone is. I purposely gave my book an atrocious cover. Very, very minimalist with, 3 colors and a really badly drawn picture.
You didn't at first.
That's true.
You've had multiple covers for multiple books, so, I mean, I guess my question is, I think it's rather than just have you tell an anecdotal story about the silly covers that you've tried, maybe it would be better to ask you what results have you had with a semi-professional cover versus a hand-drawn goofy cover versus other things that you've tried. Have you noticed a difference?
Zero difference.
Zero
difference whatsoever. So the marketing of the book is going to be way more important than the cover, in my opinion. However, my books don't sit on shelves in bookstores, so
that's the thing. So
nobody's really shopping through them by the book cover. Maybe they are on...
Well, no, but I mean, the first thing you see when you look at a book on Amazon is the cover.
Yes. And so I have had multiple different styles of covers.
The thing is that I don't know how many people are browsing books on Amazon rather than doing a search, it's one of those things I'd actually like to maybe look into myself and
someone somewhere probably has that data. I would guess that someone sat down and said, all right, so do people really shop for books on Amazon, or do they know what they're going... I think most people know what they're looking for when they go to buy a book on Amazon. I think the people that are shopping for books are largely people that are consuming audiobooks and are they're at work or they're doing something at home.
Audible is a different store than Amazon, so those are different websites.
But my point is that the people who are probably shopping and actually using covers as maybe using covers as a determining factor are, they're doing something at home or at work, and they pull up their phone and they flip through Audible real quick and they're like, all right, this looks interesting. Maybe they're like me and they look at it and they're like, all right, if it's got a good title for me, that's the first thing. Because I have seen so many good and bad book covers that I have been discounting whether it's a good or bad book based on the cover a lot more when it comes to audiobooks.
Yeah, but are you typical in that respect?
I'm probably not typical, was the point I'm going to get at. So they look at the cover and they're like, all right, and maybe they go in and read the description as well. The description 9 times out of 10 turns me off of reading a book, even if it's got a great cover.
Yeah.
So it just depends on, are people actually going into it and looking at the description after they look at the cover, or are they just saying, ooh, that looks like a nice cover, and starting it up? Now they can't.
Well,
I don't think they are on Audible.
It might not be either of those, because it might be that a person is that the average person who searches for books on Amazon is typing in an author's name, and then seeing what that author produces, and then what they also get is they click on one of the author's books and they get, based on other members of Amazon who have liked this book have also liked this book, which is not the same thing as browsing and looking at random covers, right? Like when you go to a bookstore, you might walk down walk past the shelf and look at every cover that is displayed on the shelf and say, "Ooh, I know this author's name," or "Oh, this is a neat looking cover," and then you would maybe pull the book out and read a few pages and see if it strikes your fancy. Whereas I find myself wondering whether the Amazon selection process is different enough that kind of strategy doesn't work as well, or maybe it does work fine. I guess I don't know.
I have, from personal experience, found that if I'm shopping for books on Amazon, I tend to just fall into the, I look for something and then there's suggestions of similar things and I kind of follow that path. So it's not really like I can type in science fiction, but it doesn't do me any good. See, and there's a problem with, there's a major difference between the way you shop online and in a bookstore, because if you just type in science fiction in Amazon, the first things you're going to get, obviously, are the well-known and paid advertised things.
Right.
And the next things you're going to get are going to be based off of things that are already popular. So if you're looking for stuff by new people that, like the newer stuff, you really have to go in and fidget and like find that, show me the most recent things. And even then, there's so much being published every day that you're getting a skewed look at what's recent based on what the most viewed recent books are.
Yeah.
So you don't really have a good way to shop for the newest talent out there and look for the newest things, nor do you have any way to filter your genres accurately. Like if you type in science fiction and then you type in fantasy, you're going to see I'm gonna
like say a 60% overlap.
Yeah, seriously, like a 60% overlap. I was gonna say like 45, but I think it's actually really, really high. So yeah, you'll kill yourself trying to, wondering if you've got a good enough cover. Like, okay, so let me give you an example. Your cover doesn't have to be perfect in the sense that what's on the cover, I've read a lot of books where what is on the cover isn't always even in the book. And so when I commissioned my first cover for The Good Guy and it came back with Ray Perrell wearing like shoulder armor, I was like, well, he doesn't actually wear armor in the book, but I mean, this picture's good enough and it kind of gives the message of what's going here. So I went ahead and went with it.
Sure.
I can't really say that at any point I think it hurt or helped any sales because I don't really sell that many books. But
well, I mean, you could still tell the difference between two, small but different numbers.
Yeah. I think that if you're going to do a really good book and you've got the assets to pour in, or if you're going to do a really good cover and you've got the assets to pour into it, probably not any problem. Like if you have an amazing cover, I think that will really help. I did not put amazing covers on my books. I will say that even though the cover of a book doesn't matter too much to me, if you genuinely have, like, this is a work of art as a cover for this book, you're going to stand out. There's no doubt about that. Just from, I don't think there's anyone alive that's going to tell you that if they, they see a handful of books and one of them just has a fantastic cover on it, that they're not going to be drawn to that one first. Even if it's something they don't want. It's like, ooh, this looks good. You walk up to it and it's like, Oh, it's a book on the history of pottery. Oh, okay.
This doesn't help me. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for science fiction, but it's got like a really sci-fi looking cover on it for some reason for a book of pottery. Even if it's an inaccurate cover, it's going to draw people to it. So it's not like it's a bad thing to worry about your cover. It just depends. Like, do you want to invest $3,000 into a cover if you're an independent author and you're not even sure if you're going to recoup that money back? I mean, I'm not saying it would be a bad thing to do so. That might be the reason why you start seeing more sales and eventually do recoup that money. Plus, people have read enough of your books that the next time you publish something, they're going to say, oh, that guy wrote that. I'm going to buy this book too. And then over time, over a long period of time, you won't just recoup those losses. You will make the money back and maybe even get a steady income going, depending on how much content you've got out there and how many people want to buy. Doing a very bad cover, like I wouldn't recommend doing a solid color for a cover and then just having your name really tiny on the bottom with the title really tiny on the top. You can do a solid cover or a gradient cover book and focus on just having the title look fancy and have your name fill up the bottom portion of the cover so that it kind of fills out the area and makes it something that isn't just, hey, this is just a blue book. Although you never know, that might work too. There's a lot of technical books which they're not really trying to draw your eye with their covers so much. If you're, we're talking about writing fiction mostly here.
Yeah.
But I think a fiction book wouldn't do as well to have like a solid blue cover, a white line going through the center, the title written in a relatively small font, and most of the cover just being blue, and then in the very bottom right corner having your name. I mean, that could be a cover for a book, but it's not going to stand out if you're trying to sell someone fantasy or sci-fi or horror. Whereas if you're maybe making a Python programming book, that might be a perfect cover for that kind of book.
Yeah.
So it warrants thinking about these kind of things, like who is your audience and what are they going to want to look for is important.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but getting hung up on whether or not the $50 book cover you bought is good enough is probably not the best way to spend your time. It's like, you've got the book cover, you can put the book out now, go ahead and do it, unless you want to spend that, that cool grand on a really solid book cover. A $50 to $200 book cover is fine. I mean,
I think that the thing you want to avoid is having a cover that's like that actively repels people.
Yeah, like my covers. Yeah, avoid that. We should just have like a workshop where I just show the covers I've used and be like, so this is why you shouldn't do this.
Don't do this, and then don't do this, and then really don't do this. And you see this? Don't do this.
Yeah, so hang-ups. What other hang-ups do people get when they're getting ready to get their books out there?
Probably the quality of the first draft.
Yes, this is a big one. I know we've talked about this before, but since we're specifically on this subject, it's the first draft. Write the book, finish the book, then go back and look at it and be like, you will be amazed if you just write the book and go back and look at it, how much you thought wasn't going to be good actually came out good, and how much less work there is than you thought there would be for the second draft. You might have been writing really tired one day and you're like, oh, well, should I go back and look at it now or should I wait till the first draft is done? My recommendation is always going to be finish that first draft and then go back and look at it. And you might be like, oh, I remember writing this. I was really tired, but it came out really good. I don't even have to fix anything here.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go back and write it at that moment, you're already second guessing yourself because you're like, I should check this really quick, like right now. And there's things that you should second guess right away. Like I've had a couple of stories where it was like, wait a minute, these are bit characters. I actually forgot which character was which, like which character had which name. Yeah. And I had to go back and check a couple of times in a couple of stories because it was just like, they appeared once or twice. They weren't that important. And I hadn't even worked out really, what more there was going to be with them. So it's just like, oh, wait, this one was the one that is supposed to be doing this. I have to change this name. It's happened a few times to me.
Yeah, I mean, you'll get those things. You'll get those things more thoroughly on like a reread and then a redraft after a reread.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that one of the things that happens when you're writing is that even if you aren't really putting out like the best material, you're still putting out a framework which you can then
Yeah.
build on later on. And so, like for instance, the first draft, my current work in progress, my current novel, it's my first novel, first full length novel. I've written novellas of under 40,000 words before, but I haven't written anything above that threshold. And so my first version, my first draft was about 50,000 words, a short novel. But what had happened was I had kind of gotten a little bit, like, what's the word? Disenchanted with it. Maybe 2/3 of the way through, and kind of phoned in several of those chapters and like near the end. And what I ended up discovering was that yes, I did need to change those chapters. I needed to add, descriptions and character interactions and things like that. But at the same time, I had a pretty decent scaffold where I could say, okay, this is what happens in these 3 paragraphs. I'm going to delete these 3 paragraphs and rewrite them, and this thing X is going to happen. But now I'm going to make it from 3 paragraphs into 6 paragraphs, and Y, Z, and A are going to happen, and characters B and C are going to have an interaction that they didn't have before. And so, like there are going to be times when you're writing a longer work where you feel like you're not at your best, and realistically, what you probably should be doing is rather than like giving up and saying, "Well, I'll write when I feel more inspired," just get a scaffold up. It doesn't need to be complete, but what you're doing is you're basically creating a rough template for what you're going to add later in the revision process. And so I just finished my 4th draft of the book, and it has expanded to 77,000 words. So now it's a medium length novel, not a short one. And I'm actually becoming a lot more. I'm liking it a lot more as I read it too. And so a lot of the language that was in the first draft is still there, but a lot of it's been shifted around. Some of it's been removed and replaced with different descriptions. I've added more character stuff. I've added more descriptions of like the setting. I added a couple of chapters to give a couple other characters some time to shine, and all that. And I've added a lot of length to it. What that length has been fleshing out the bits that were kind of scaffoldy in the early drafts and making them into something that's actually maybe interesting to read.
Yeah, that might be another hang-up that you don't really need to worry about so much. If you're writing something and you're at the 50,000 word area and you go to do your second draft and it comes out with another 27,000 words, like in your case, that's not a big deal. That means that, your better story is the longer version.
Well, it's one of those things where there might be places where the way I've edited it. I mean, it's been 3 additional drafts since then, so like it's actually been a much more incremental process, because like the first time through I was mostly looking for typos and inconsistencies in like the way I wrote things. Like I had to decide, for instance, whether I wanted to hyphenate light years, and I decided in the end to do so because I also use things like light minutes and light hours, and a person can see the word light years unhyphenated and say, "Oh, I know what that means." But then when you see in the middle of a sentence light minutes or light hours, suddenly it becomes much more complicated. And so for consistency's sake, I decided to hyphenate all of those distances so that it looks like one word instead of 2 words.
Yeah, that's good structure.
Things like that. You kind of build a little bit of a style guide for yourself as you're editing too, and that's normal because you're not going to be 100% consistent. I was capitalizing certain things in the first draft that I decided to not capitalize anymore. And then after that, as I was going through, slowly and carefully, I was like, oh, I can add more character interaction here. Oh, I can have this person say something here. Oh, I can take this person's speech and give it to this other person so that, I have a little bit more like even distribution of speaking of main characters kind of thing. Because there was one character who was just kind of taking all the limelight, and I was like, well, I'll change these couple of paragraphs up a little bit and give it over to this other character so that they can kind of show a little bit of their character too, as opposed to having 60% of the dialogue be one guy. The idea would be that like I'm polishing who says what so that certain people there's no one character that gets all the dialogue or even monologue, so that this is actually about this topic, and this character would probably be a better source for the opinions on this topic, so we'll let him speak or her speak instead. It's one of those things where, because that scaffolding is there, now I can start adding things. Now I can start seeing spaces where it looks empty much more easily than if I had just and sooner than if I had just not written on those days. That's the other thing too, is that you don't want to. You will always find more time that you need to write than time that you feel truly inspired. And so, part of it is learning to kind of push through that little kind of light writer's block where it's like, oh, I'm not really feeling it today. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. There's a temptation. Everybody has that temptation. And one of the things that you have to do to write regularly is to start to learn to fight that temptation and produce stuff, as opposed to only producing when you... Because you learn things by editing your less stellar work as well. The fact that I had to go back and edit this stuff means that I kind of got a better feel for the work, and reading it multiple times to do multiple drafts has been helpful in keeping things consistent, in avoiding like having character A say something and then having character B say the same thing 2 paragraphs later, and there's a thing there, I gotta fix that. There's a lot of more subtle fixes that start to come into play later on in like 3rd and 4th drafts, because now you've got something where there's not really any typos anymore, and the question is, how is this flowing? Do these characters make sense? Are these characters interacting in a way that's realistic for how I've established them? Kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, and that the whole idea of pushing through and having your scaffolding is actually one of the better ways to deal with writer's block. Like,
yeah,
if I've got a scene coming up that I've been preparing for, that I've had in my mind, that I knew I was going to put there, and there's this gap between the scene before and that scene that I didn't have anything for yet, and I'm at that point now, I just start putting in whatever, maybe throwing in some character dialogue or jumping to another scene where something else is happening and seeing how long it takes me to figure out how to tie the two in. And I usually end up with some useful stuff a lot of times. So like take the instance where I had the trouble remembering the names of the characters. Now, if you're a person who plots out your story well in advance, you tend not to have this problem. You can still have this problem if you come up with a really good idea halfway through and you're like, this would make things better. But in general,
even if you outline make an outline with 2 very similar characters, it's very easy to get them confused even with an outline.
Yeah. And if you're doing it like me, if you're the pantser versus the plotter, which I'm not sure I like that term, but I'll go ahead and use it.
Shirts versus skins?
Yeah, shirts versus skins. As you're writing, you will get to those points where it's like, well, what do I do here? And it could be something that you create in that moment that 70% of the way through the book, you're closing in on the climax, and it's like, wait a minute. That thing that I wrote earlier, that actually creates an entirely new situation where I can have this happen and this happen. It's like I had characters grow out of the current story and into potential future stories just because it was like, well, I was going to do something with some characters here that I didn't come up with, and now I have to come up with them. So here, I'll come up with some names really quick. That's their names, and here's what they're going to do. And then it's like, you get to the end of the story and, oh, they're actually a little bit fleshed out now. And you either fully flesh them out throughout that story, or you can look at it like, well, like especially if you're creating a larger world through several books. Well, I can use this person again in this other book, and they'll be even more fleshed out in that book. So you create a lot of. Do I have a really good example for this? I'm kind of using a vague example here. Okay, so I had a character in a story who was supposed to be essentially this unstoppable supervillain who had turned good guy. And during the course of the story, I wanted to start doing stuff with magic because I wanted it to be a surprise for a certain set of characters or for one character in particular, that magic was real. In this world where all this other weird stuff was happening, it's like, oh, wait, there's magic too? And it was going to kind of build to a joke where it's like, well, what's this guy going to do against magic? I mean, he's got technology, he's got weapons, he's practically unbeatable in a fight, but what's he going to do with, he can use magic. Okay. And following that up, I was like, well, what does it mean that this character can use magic, though? I can't just I can, but I didn't want to just leave it as, oh yeah, he can do that too, which was the running joke in the book. So I was like, let's focus on that a bit more, because we've introduced magic in the story. And I gave him a cousin, which, for the longest time, I kind of wanted a character that was my own personal version of Lena Inverse from the Slayers. And my opportunity just came up in that story out of nowhere. It was like, oh, this is going to be that character. This is going to be my Lena Inverse. He's going to have a cousin that is the best sorceress in the world, but for some reason, even though she's better at magic, she's got more powerful magic than the character in this book, she always loses to him, and it drives her crazy. That was going to be my my Lena Inverse. And now, not only did I didn't give her a full chapter. She was at the beginning of a chapter where more important things happened. I just sort of introduced her just for the heck of it, just because, it seemed like the right time for another family meeting for that character, because you don't really know much about the main character in the book throughout the story.
Right.
So I just drop little tidbits here and there that if I ever feel like doing more with, I can do more with. And in this case, the book I'm working on now is the main character is that Lena Inverse-esque character. And one of the fun things that I've been doing throughout that book is constantly having her, you get her inner thoughts once in a while talking about being envious of her cousin and hating that she always loses to her cousin.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a whole book now. So that's just something that was just like, I'm just going to create a character for no reason out of nowhere right now, and just to move the story along. And it worked out great. You got that scaffolding down. You've got tons of stuff that you can work with from there out. A lot of times those are the things you remember best, so you're not really going to forget what it is you want to do with them, or what the point of that character is.
Yeah.
So yeah, just if you hit what you're thinking is writer's block, just write anyway is really the solution to that. Even if you think what you're writing sucks, even if it's like, oh, I'm just writing filler dialogue here. It's entirely possible that filler dialogue may be the thing you go back to and say, oh, that's actually the solution to this new problem I have, is this dialogue that these characters had.
Or you might find that, like, reading that dialogue a week later inspires you to write something else that you wouldn't have thought of if you didn't have that original seed idea.
Yeah, you can replace it with the even better idea, and that's what really needs to go there.
Right.
And so now you've got that foundation, and you've built on that idea and made it a better idea now as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's like...
writer's block should not be a thing, essentially.
Yeah, well, in a previous episode, it might even be the previous episode, depending on what order these get put out on. But we were talking about, like, people wanting to, like, rip out all of the additional descriptions out of works, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, the idea is that, yeah, you can, and if it's all you've got at the moment, you can and should just write, he went to the store. Later on, in the same way that we talked about, like, little side things of like a character taking a breath or something like that might blossom into interesting little descriptive bits that he went to the store might turn into a whole chapter later on when you actually are more, on your game. So,
Chapter 3, what happened at the store?
Yeah, exactly. And so, don't neglect the fact that you're getting down ideas clumsily sometimes, because it's way easier to take an idea that's expressed clumsily and expand and improve upon it than it is to have an idea, not to express it because you thought you would put it down clumsily, and then come back a month later and not remember what that idea was in the first place.
Yeah, and there's also something to consider when you have a really good idea and you've gotten to the point where it's time to write that idea, and if you're hung up on, well, I didn't actually make the transition from this scene to that scene yet, you can handle it in two very good ways. You can either write the thing that you know is coming next and you just need a little bit beforehand to tie it in. You can write that first and then go back and do the tie-in. Or you can bumble through a tie-in and come back to it and see, what you can do with it.
Well, you don't have to bumble. The thing is that, like, hypothetically, like, you could bumble through it, but the point, what I would say is that when you're feeling uninspired like that, just write basic stuff. Write stuff where you're like, oh, he talked to this person and, they agreed to this, and you cut yourself down to an 8th grade level or a 5th grade level and write things. Because if you stumble around trying to perfect it now, you're going to waste more time. The fact is that you're just not feeling inspired today. That's fine. So write stuff in a more clinical way and then come back to it later when you're feeling inspired and fill in the details. This person said to this person X. Well, is this actually relevant to the story? Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, let's actually put some dialogue there when I'm feeling a little bit more inspired. But, get the ideas down rather than letting them fade away. Because, I can't tell you how many times I had an idea and I was like, oh, I should write that down. And then, like, I go, like, wash a dish and come back and I'm like, what was I thinking about?
Well, in my experience, that happens so much that I don't worry about it. It's like, I'm going to come up with something, even if I forgot the thing that I really, really was thinking about at the time. And it tends to work out, I find.
Yeah, I mean, it works out eventually, but, like, still, I had an idea the other day and I was like, oh, that was a really good idea. Wait, what was it? And it's like, I could have written that, I could have had a little project to write. And now, I need to like, well, do something else, which is fine. But at the same time, I was just like, man, it would have been great if I had written that down, because then I would just have another thing to do, as opposed to, working on the things I'm already working on. But, like, man, having something new to try or to play around with would have been really cool. Well, now I need to think about, try to remember what the heck it was.
I think that I kind of, since I've had that happen so much, I kind of just want to point out that could be another thing that is a hang-up for people. Like, they came up with an idea, they can't quite remember it, and then they spend a week not doing anything because they're like, no, I need to remember that, and then it just...
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't wait for the idea to come back. If you can write down, like, 1 or 2 words about the idea and put them on a piece of paper or in a notepad file somewhere and come back to it later, maybe, but, like, don't lament over the fact that you forgot to put down an idea and it's gone. It's gone. There's, sitting and thinking about it probably isn't going to help. You can try it, but limit that time to, like, double-digit numbers, at most, and don't let it get in the way of finishing things that you actually do know how to finish, because there's always the chance that something that you thought was a really good idea, the reason you didn't remember it is because it wasn't really that great an idea, actually, kind of thing. It's the nitrous oxide hallucination effect.
Yeah. But there's also, let's say you finish your project and it's done and over with, and then you remember. Well, you just reinterpret that idea in a different project. If it was a really good idea, you use it for something else. It's definitely not the end of the world.
Hypothetically, you could write a short story that is, related to your finished project, and then use that short story as a lever to help, advertise that larger project, right?
Yeah.
If I finish the novel that I'm working on and it's published and out there, and I realize, oh, wait a minute, this really should have been a scene, I can just write a short story with that scene in it and say, this is untold side stories of book blah. Only now they're told because I'm telling them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did this kind of. I did I've got a couple of vampire story ideas that I wanted to do as as like things related to what happened in The Good Guy. And
Sure.
I'm just going to do like 4 or 5 of them and then compile them together into a short story collection.
Right.
So it's just amazing, like the things that you can get hung up on, but then when you actually just sit down and go through things, I have found that things work themselves out so well sometimes for the stupidest reasons. Like the story I'm working on now was supposed to have a bit character that was just going to be there to have like a funny scene in the story.
Sure.
And I made up everything about her completely on the spot as I was doing that particular scene. And I had all these different types of witches and wizards, and one of them was there were witches of Dominion who aren't necessarily as powerful as a sorceress or anything, but in their own specific area, they're like the expert, right?
Sure.
And that was just going to be a throwaway thing. There wasn't going to be much else done with that character in the story. And then as I crept closer to the end, it's like, oh no, she would actually be a good one to show up at this castle and like be in this group of mages that was secretly trying to stop the evil thing from happening. And then,
Right.
and then I'm at that point and it's like, oh, and actually she would be a good one to, wonder what's going on with this whole thing where this one character turned. I wrote this thing where a character turns up out of nowhere but like everyone was expecting this character. So like it was almost like a prophecy.
Yeah.
And I had a reason for it, and I can't really like I'm not fully fleshing out the reason in that story because it links to another story. So it's just going to be one of them things where I like explain enough of it so that it's satisfying.
Yeah, you create a teaser or something.
Not even a teaser. Like if you were to read through it, you wouldn't even know that there was going to be more about that particular subject. But I just wanted it to come to a decent enough conclusion, so it's just like, no, you left this gaping mystery here. Why did this happen?
Right.
And so I had to have this character show up and just be like, I don't know why I'm here. Someone told me to come here. And everyone else is like, yeah, we knew you were coming, but we don't know who it was that told you to come here. And he ends up being a really important character because it takes place in a place called the Pixie Lands. He's a pixie.
Yeah.
All of the other pixies were corrupted, and there's some dark evil trying to break through into this universe. And so he's the only one that really has any connection to the land. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Wait, this is... I wasn't sure how they were going to stop the first of the giant monsters that they were going to fight in the book. And it's like, wait, she's a witch of Dominion. He has a link with the Dominion of Pixie Lands. This is how they beat the monster. And it just all tied together out of nowhere. It's like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And none of those characters neither of those characters were supposed to be important after their initial appearance. And it just ended up being now they're, main staples of the story.
Yeah.
So, pushing through the supposed writer's block might give you all the things you need to get where you want to be, essentially.
Right.
Especially if you write by the seat of your pants, if your skin's not shirts, you will probably stumble upon the answer somewhere. So just go for it. Don't set yourself back like 10 years over nothing.
Yeah. Also,
don't be incredibly slow about finishing things like I am, because you write 20 things at a time. From experience.
Here's the thing. You've already said that part of your outlook is that you are not trying to write to be commercially successful.
Yeah, but I can guarantee you won't be if you write like me.
Well, that's my point, right? Yeah, is that if you're not interested in commercial success at all, then you can write as slowly as you feel. But generally speaking, it's better to try to write regularly rather than in fits and starts, just because it'll be easier to tie things together if you're doing it a little bit every day, as opposed to, what was I writing 2 weeks ago? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of different reasons to try to even things out, and right, and you don't want to spend too much effort in 1 minute, and then 2 weeks later I guess what I'm trying to say is that doing things regularly is usually better for your skill level than doing things in fits and starts. And that's probably true for most people of writing as well. And so the goal should be to do a little bit every day, as opposed to taking a 7-year hiatus, like, say, I did. So
yeah, this is true for writing as it is for anything else. I used to practice martial arts feverishly, and there was a 12-year period where I was just like, this isn't benefiting me in any way other than keeping me in shape, and I have other things to do. So I didn't do anything for a very long time. And I've slowly started getting back into a much, much smaller exercise routine than what I used to do. But I was like,
yeah,
I was sitting around last week, and I was like, I bet I could still do 1,000 kicks. So I'm going to try to do 1,000 kicks. I got to 150, and I was like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I need to exercise more often. I need to get back up to that level, because 1,000 used to be nothing. It used to be just like, this is my daily workout routine.
Yeah.
And now it's just like my leg wasn't steady after 60, and the muscles were tired after 70, and it got hard to hold my foot the right way by the time I got to 80, and then by the time I got to 150, I was basically just flinging my leg up and probably not even getting that much of a muscle workout.
Right.
So
the same type of kick consistently, or
same type of kick
types?
Consistently.
Just a front kick or a side kick, or what?
Front kick, but it wouldn't have mattered. It would have been the same either way.
Well, you might find that different kicks have slightly different results, simply because you're working different muscles, and you're using different joints. So
I mean, the results would have been the same.
Front kicks are about as simple as it gets.
Oh no! Front kicks are. If you're doing a front kick where you lift with the knee bent and kick out, that's actually, for one thing, that's harder than a straight axe kick, raising your leg and kicking straight up, or going to the side if you're just doing a straight kick sideways, kind of like just raising the leg to push someone back.
No, the issue I was thinking about was more like the flexibility in your hips or something like that, because the front kick doesn't use the ball part of your hip. It's a back and forth motion of your femur, and so it doesn't require that ball to roll smoothly, and that's the part that gets hard as you get older, is the ability of that ball to roll smoothly in the pelvis joint.
Either way, you are doing that to some extent, and there's different ways to do front kicks, so I'm not sure which would be doing that, although I'm pretty sure, because so I used to practice the front kick two different, well, we're on a tangent now, aren't we? I used to practice the front kick two different ways. I would practice it with very little waist motion, where it was going for as quick as possible to raise the leg and kick out, which is a not very powerful kick, but you can do it incredibly fast to catch someone off guard. Right. And the other way is where I would have a good stance, good posture, and I would do the full raise and a slight turn moving forward, because I'd be standing at an angle. We were in doing the ninja thing. We always kind of worked at basically a 45-degree angle. We went with the 8 directions style of doing things. And I would raise the leg inward and kick straight out, which is, it's moving your hip at a wobbling, seesaw motion a lot of the time as you're going into the kick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course side kicks are doing that a bit more, especially if you're trying to do a high side kick.
Right.
Doing really low kicks, all these different kicks. My point is that no matter what kicks I would have done, even if I had done the kicks where you raise your foot barely any length off the ground and then kick down like you're kicking someone's shin.
Yeah.
The muscle wasn't there anymore after all this time. And so just like with writing, if you start writing a book and you go away from it for 5 years and you come back to that book, you're going to see several things. I've done this before, and one of the things I noticed is that you have to actively go back and remember what exactly the style was that you were writing in a lot of the times, and because you'll see your tone change sometimes, especially if you've improved writing other things since you wrote the last thing. And you'll also see that your paragraph structure is a little different, like the way that your rhythm is off. Like you had a different rhythm at that time and the way you like to structure your paragraphs.
Yeah.
You might be using different vocabulary because over time people tend to adopt different vocabulary into their life. And so you wrote one way 5 years ago, and now you've picked up a bunch of different ways that people, that especially like younger people with new ways of talking, you've kind of picked up some of that by hanging around on Twitter, and now you're wording things slightly differently for a character that, especially if you're trying to write like a younger character, in your head you're like, okay, this is how young people talk now.
Right. Badly.
Yes, very badly in most cases. And it's not too hard to get back into the groove of things. It's not too hard to say, okay, well, actually, the way I was writing this character, they talked more like this, and I was thinking more in terms of like this kind of way of speaking. I gotta get back into that. And you just need to keep it in your head consciously just a little bit to catch back onto what you were doing. It doesn't take too long to readjust.
Hopefully.
Or you might not want to readjust. You might want to edit the old stuff and make it sound like the newer stuff.
Right.
But you're definitely going to see that you do things a little differently if you're going back to something that's half finished from 5 years previously, and you're going to have to run to catch up a bit. It might take a couple of days for you to get back in the swing of things. Fortunately, it's easier than getting back into the swing of throwing 1,000 kicks out a day. You don't really have to build any physical muscle to do this. So I don't know. Those are a couple of hang-ups. Is there a big one that we're missing? Is there one that we really should discuss, or did we hit a few good ones that'll maybe hopefully help someone out if they're feeling that pang of, oh, I'm not doing this right?
Well, we covered feeling uninspired. We covered revisions and drafts. We covered,
and we got the word count
covered
thing.
like spending too much time counting how much you're writing as opposed to writing.
Now it is fine. It is fine to like look at what you've done and be like, "Ooh, I wrote 3,000 words today," and just you go ahead and feel good about that.
Well, I mean, yeah, sure.
The thing is not to lie to yourself that it's important, especially to other people, because you're wasting your time. You shouldn't waste your time unless that's like the only thing that really matters to you in your life is this bar graph of things that you've done, and you just want to look at the bar graph and be like, I mean, I'm not going to say that I don't occasionally like pointing out that, oh, I wrote a 230,000 word fiction novel. It's fun. Right. I did that. It's a cool thing. I think it's really cool that I actually got all the way through that and was like, wow, I wrote a really long book, and it didn't even really feel like it took me that much time, honestly.
Yeah.
And that's actually that's a learning process. It's like, if someone had just told me write a 230,000 word book, I'd have been like, that's a lot of work. Having written a book that long, it's just like, I mean, really, it makes anything seem doable. Because War and Peace is about twice as long as that. War and Peace is about a 500,000 word book, and you would think, oh, that would be really hard to do. But I got halfway there, and it's like, no, actually, it was really easy. And then you look at textbooks, and it's like, imagine the work that goes into a textbook. And before I wrote that book, I was like, yeah, writing a full length textbook for like a college course would be a really hard thing. And after I wrote that book, it's like, okay, yeah, I know that's a lot more work than writing a fiction novel. But now it looks doable. Like it looks like I feel much more confident that I could write a college level textbook if I felt like doing it. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, yeah, these accomplishments do matter in some degree because you can learn from having accomplished
So the point you're making
something.
here, I think we can highlight the fact that what you can pay attention to is like your most recent record. I wrote X words in a day. I edited X chapters in a day. And the cool thing about those is that they give you they give you something to try to compete with, and competition is often the source of great innovation as well. So, the fact that you wrote 3,500 words yesterday is great, but but maybe the lesson that you should learn from it is that maybe you can write 3,750 tomorrow.
Maybe.
So,
I would put the caveat on that, like, that shouldn't be the thing you focus on.
no, that shouldn't be the thing you focus on, but like it is something to say, because what you want to avoid is directly targeting that. But if you sit down, a week later and you have a really good session and you're like, cool, I'm happy with what I wrote today. I think I did a pretty good job. Oh, this is 3,600 words. I beat my previous record. Excellent. You just keep exercising that brain muscle and keep lengthening your attention span and keep deepening the level of work that you can do without, losing quality, basically.
Yeah, because, I mean, I definitely didn't look at that, I didn't look at that book and I was like, okay, well, I wrote 230,000 words for this book, so my next one has to be much bigger. That's not a thing.
Right.
You don't want to do that.
Don't do that.
But it can be a motivator to be like, well, I know what I can do. Can I do more? Can I do better? Like, I know.
You could even say something like, I wrote a 230,000 page or 230,000 word book in X years or X months. Can I, this one is, and then when you finish your next one, you say, okay, this one was only 130,000 or whatever, but I wrote it in, less than half as many months as the previous one. There's all kinds of different metrics you can measure yourself with. And the ones that help, that encourage you to do better, are the ones that you want to look at the most. That sounds super obvious, but like, pure word count isn't what you want. But pure word count sustained over a long period might be worth more. Sustained word count that you're satisfied with might be more useful. Actually completing a project and getting something up on the market, that might be a better measurement as well. But if you're only working on your first thing, then you got to work with what you got too. So
yeah, and I can't stress this enough. It is not important to anyone the length of the book I wrote. It's barely important to me. To me, it's just like, that's something I did. But you need to think in terms of, okay, you've overcome the hurdle. You've published your first book. It's impressive, but you have to like step back and be like, all right, what does impressive matter? Like, lots of people have written their first book, and people have done way more impressive things than writing books. Writing books is fun and can be rewarding and can be profitable, but it's not like it's the most important thing in the universe. So don't get hung up on the prestige of things. If your goal is to be a writer, the prestige of it shouldn't really matter. It should just be a case of, yeah, I write books and hopefully I make money doing it. Or if you do make money, then... you're allowed to brag. You're allowed to be like, yeah, I wrote a book.
I'm not even going in that direction, but like, I guess my point that I'm trying to make is that if you can write and get prestige for it, then that's a good thing. But like,
yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that
it's got to come from the outside, and not that kind of prestige has to come from the outside, relatively unbidden, as opposed to you poking people for compliments on Twitter.
Yeah. Like, I mean, we have a case in point right now in the world. It's like, that's great that you made a ton of money, George R.R. Martin. You wrote some books that a lot of people loved. You had television shows, but now he's going to come out and give his opinions on things like Tolkien and whatnot. And it's like, sure, you can give your opinions on Tolkien, but you haven't even finished the book that you told everyone you were going to write yet. The prestige is waning. It's like,
well, prestige is extremely fickle.
Yeah, prestige is based on other people's view of you, not what you think people should feel about you. So the prestige isn't really important. I guess that's really the central point, is that prestige comes from other people. And if your primary concern is what other people think about you, then you're probably doing yourself a disservice, because,
well, if you're a writer and your primary concern is what people think of you, then you're already playing a losing game.
Yeah.
There are plenty of things that you could do that would be way more impactful, that would get you, and I'm being, morally neutral here. There are plenty of things you could do that would get you a lot more accolades from people around you than sitting down for 6 months and writing a really good novel. Because reading is a niche hobby, and there's plenty of ways to entertain people that, frankly, hit more people these days. You probably would have done better writing a TV show.
Yeah,
which is unfortunate, but probably true.
Well, let's hit for a little bit of honesty here when we're talking about being a writer. 70% of the people that are calling themselves readers out there and are saying they like this author, or they like that author, about 70% of them are probably just listening to the audiobooks. So let's not dance around it too much. I work a 9 to 5. And that's my income. I write books and I write stories, but I work a 9 to 5. Assuming that I was making my money writing those books instead of working the 9 to 5, let's assume that was the case. I was actually making money off of this.
Yeah.
The guy down the road that goes into his plumbing, that does plumbing for a living, is much more useful of a human being than I am, if all I'm doing is writing books and making a bit of money off of it. That plumber is going to be much more reliable for an actual thing that has to be done than I will ever be if the entirety of my life
let's actually think about this in a slightly different path. But you are more likely to be helpful to that plumber as someone who works at a home supply store than as a writer. Possibly,
that
right?
is true. Well, it depends. So let's not discount writing like it's not important or anything. If you're making money writing, chances are you're paying a plumber at some point to do something for you. The money itself is pretty important in anything that people get paid to do. Having the money is in itself not. That's better than prestige in my book for a start. But
it's a more neutral, because you can.
It's not to say that if you're a writer you're not important. That's not the exact thing I'm trying to say here. I'm just trying to say that if what you want to do is be a writer and make money writing, then why do you care about the prestige? Why do you care if like I've seen recently, this is another thing.
The prestige often comes with money if you're a writer.
There's that too, but there's another thing that actually we could have brought up about. We got one more hang up here.
Okay.
I've seen recently, and I don't know if it's a younger generation thing or what, but there's been a few episodes on writing Twitter recently where I've seen people who attacked a customer, not physically, but went off on a customer for leaving a bad review for your book. That review for your book is not that important. One review doesn't matter, and I would argue that even if the majority of the reviews for your book are bad, if you step back and say, well, let's see, 700 people hated it, but 500 people liked it, and they all paid me for it, don't worry about the bad review. It's your...
Well, but unfortunately,
what is in
this day and age, when people look at anything on Amazon, they look at how many stars it has.
That's true, but that's the thing is why? What are you really helping by hunting down a customer to yell at them who gave you a bad review? That just looks bad on you. If you really want a quick way to lose prestige, that review is not going to give you more prestige than you're going to lose by being a jerk, essentially.
Well, sure, that's true. The idea would be that the thing to do from unsolicited criticism is to determine A, is that criticism in good faith, and B, if the criticism is in good faith, can I implement any of the things that it suggests or fix any of the problems that it raises?
Yes,
and the answer might be yes and the answer might be no, but at the same time, you're going to waste more time looking for that person, and you don't cyberstalk people. That's just bad, just stupid. Don't do that.
And remember, in the end, if someone really has it out for you, they can pay 1,000 people to leave bad reviews for your books, and there's nothing you can do about it.
That's much cheaper, than you would believe.
Yeah, so don't worry about it too much. If you really have that much trouble taking criticism, it's not going to prevent you from being a writer. You just have to not read your reviews. I mean, if your goal is to be a writer, the reviews really don't matter that much to begin with.
Well, if the goal is to be a commercially successful writer, then the reviews matter. But
to
attacking
the
critics is
degree
not
that
usually the way to do it.
If your goal is to be a writer, worrying about the reviews isn't getting you in your chair and writing your next novel. Is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
You can waste your time wondering what everyone thinks about you and wondering if someone has it out for you and what you can do about that, and should I point out that this person's acting in bad faith to try and save myself a little bit of face. It's a losing battle. It's not that important. You just keep writing your books. The people that read your books and see it and are like, yeah, this is a good book, they're not going to be put off from your next book by a bunch of really negative reviews attacking the author. You can be guaranteed of that. Like if I read a review for a book and it's clear that this person just has it out for this author, I'm ignoring that review. And for the most part, when I look at reviews for books, I don't really read too many of them. I look at the star rating on Amazon. I look at the number of people that gave it reviews. And then, if I really feel like I need to investigate more, I'll look at the best reviews and I'll look at the worst reviews. Anything in the middle, doesn't really matter because, there might be good reviews in there, but the worst reviews, it's like, okay, are these genuine reviews? And the best reviews, same thing. Are these genuine reviews? You can usually tell when good or bad reviews are being paid for, to be honest. So, you're never going to know how people are looking at the reviews for your books to begin with. Like, you might be thinking, oh, people are actually reading these reviews. Half of the people that are looking at the reviews are probably not actually reading that many of them.
Well, so there's a lot going on here. There could be the average person who's reading the reviews is either A, going to mostly just look at the number, and not read too many of the reviews, or B, they're going to do what you said and look and see, hey, okay, there's 100 5-star and 100 1-star. Which one, I'll read a couple of each and see which ones seem to be more likely to be, bots. And then there's the people where they've already read the book and they just want some confirmation bias. So, there's a number of reasons why people go check out the reviews.
There's one more really important thing about the reviews that you should think about too.
Sure.
You've got, all right. Let's say that you've got 16,000 reviews for a book, and you see a bunch of bad reviews that are really aggravating. Maybe they're not in good faith. Maybe they are, and it just gets your gander up.
Yeah.
Dander, not gander. Get your dander up.
It could get your gander up too. I mean, if you have one.
Yeah, it could get your goose as well as your dander up. You sold 16,000 books. 16,000 people bought a copy of your book. You're good. Those reviews aren't hurting you at this point. And let's say you have 5 reviews and 4 of them are really, really bad. Good faith or not at this point. You've sold 5 books. That's 5 people that reviewed your book. That's not that big a deal. You can make more sales than that. You can get 5 more reviews just by going out and hitting the streets and like giving people business cards and saying, hey, here's my, like, you could probably generate more than those 5 sales and get more than 5 reviews of genuine, honest reviews from people out of just like marketing your book to a handful of people that you know. So you haven't made any money yet. You haven't been hurt by this. Oh, this guy, absolutely, I hate this guy's book. It's so stupid. All the punctuation's bad, yada yada. Your punctuation's perfect, but all this stuff is just like, his punctuation, no commas, no periods. He wrote several words upside down. I don't know what was going on. It could be all lies, but it's 5 reviews. You haven't sold anything yet. Nobody cares about, nobody's even looking at those reviews because they can't find you on Amazon because you haven't sold enough to really make it in the algorithm. So you just go out and you make that happen. And by the time you get 100 people to read it, those 5 reviews don't matter anymore, especially if you've got a really good book.
Yeah.
So really, at the end.
What happens if you have a bad book?
Well, if you have a bad book, then you either need to not read your reviews or you need to be able to take constructive criticism and be like, oh, do I actually need to learn how to use grammar properly? Which is a yes.
Right.
That's actually a big yes.
Please do that.
I would recommend especially there's people that write in their second languages because I guess it's a better market to write in English. There's a lot
Sure.
of people that are from like, Spain or, European countries where English is not the first language. They learn English and they write their book in English. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But depending on how well you speak English, it would probably be better to write it in your native language and hire a translator, which can be expensive, but if you've got a really good book, you'll definitely be able to cover that cost. I mean, a translator you're looking at about the same cost as maybe a really, really good cover for a book. So it is expensive, but you would do much better to have a coherent book than to try and write in a second language that you don't have a firm grasp on. And that's not to say that you can't do that. Like if you've got a decent grasp on English and you write a book and you can do it in English, and that will save you a lot of money on having someone look it over. It's cheaper than hiring a translator to just hire someone.
Editors are cheaper than translators.
Yeah, editors will do a lot of that work as part of their job, just because it's like, oh, well, your grammar is incorrect here. That's what they do. That's what they're paid to do.
That's what editing is. Yes.
Yeah. So don't worry too much about it having to be in English. But if you can write it in English and that's what you want to do, then it also doesn't have to be perfect, because you can hire someone to make it perfect.
Yeah.
You write the story, they fix all the grammatical problems that come up from having a different first language. Many are their which of is.
Something like that.
Desione.
Massacre.
So yeah, hang-ups. Don't hang yourself with them.
Don't let them get too far around your neck, or otherwise you might get hurt. That's.
Did we just threaten everyone listening to this?
Yes, we did.
You better not have any hang-ups or we're coming for you.
Yeah, that's right. 2 unsuccessful authors are going to waste their time coming to find you for having hang-ups about your own writing that we can't see because you haven't put it out anywhere, by definition. So, yeah, watch out.
It'd be like the end of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back.
Yeah, something like that.
All right,
we can get a van and we can cross the country finding people who are having hang-ups as writings, and then, like, I don't know, doing something. Let's keep that vague. Let's keep that part vague.
Yeah.
My lawyer has advised me to keep that part vague. He's right behind me right now, staring at me and shaking his head disapprovingly.
He specifically told us not to say that we're keeping it vague on purpose, but, you can't ask the world of me.
Hey, he's not a time traveler. I mean, come on.
All right, well.
Yeah, I think we've got an episode here.
I think we do. I think we... hopefully we'll be saving someone some time somewhere.
Yeah, hopefully someone will listen to this and they'll be like, you know what, I am wasting too much time thinking that I, need to wait till I'm more inspired. And I am wasting too much time trying to rethink of ideas that I lost because I, didn't write them down. And, maybe I should just sit down and try to get, 2,000 words a day for a week straight and see what happens.
I am wasting my time sitting here being a writer. I'm going to go out for a walk. No, that wasn't the message.
Hey, if we can get people to go from writing to plumbing, we might have made the world a better place.
I wish that wasn't true, but it is.
All right. Everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We have been the Wordy Pair, and we shall continue to be the Wordy Pair. I'm Rudy.
And I am Justin, and the Wordy Pair is out.
We will see you all later.
I don't like that. We're not doing that again.
Not doing what again?
I'm not using that phrase again. Wordy Pair out.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's at Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, at Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.